A lot of what I do on this channel is look at media and try to find its latent messaging, generally with a radical leftist bias. I am, in no uncertain terms, a propagandist who tries to put the ideals of communism in a surprising context, which will hopefully work as an activation trigger that gets you asking the right questions. I don't want to be a resource or an endpoint. I want to be someone who helps open a door by slipping ideas in where you might not expect them. A lot of times in these discussions, we get caught up on intentionality. In my Politics of the McElroy Brothers video, I end by saying, "Baby, that's communism!" Now, do I think that this is an intentional message? Do I think that the brothers themselves are literally communists? For me, that question isn't terribly important because regardless of what anyone says, their belief is most loudly spoken in their work, in what they do. In my experience, a decent chunk of people are politically inactive. Especially in America, politics have become so stratified that for a lot of folks, the conversation begins and ends at, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? When you get past that political tribalism, however, you start to find people who vote Republican, but who also infrequently lapse into rhetoric that is surprisingly egalitarian. Many of us, I think it's safe to say, were raised with catch-all ideas like the golden rule, the idea that you should treat others as you would have them treat you. It's a sterilized notion under capitalism because our culture has been individualized to the point that we don't understand kindness beyond simple one-off actions, but if your political team does not make explicit its opposition to certain ideas, or you just miss those messages altogether, you may find yourself naturally strained towards a compassion that, to you, does not seem incongruent with your supposed political affiliation. When you take that egalitarian mindset to its logical conclusion, if you really apply it systematically, you can easily wind up at something that starts to look a little bit like communism. So maybe the McElroys are communists, maybe they aren't. To me, the point is irrelevant because the philosophy they espouse across the body of their work, however general, however understated, is one that pretty easily reads as communist. And that's basically what I do here. I interpret texts that seem to me to have an interesting lefty message. All of which is to say that with this channel, I'm rarely engaging with the intentional and instead digging for the implied. So what happens when I find a text that isn't a euphemism? A Bewitching Revolution is a short indie game by Celestia where you are the witch of the city, here to sow the seeds of revolution among the people through tarot readings, potions, spells, and the practice of rewilding urban environments. A lot happens in this little game despite the fact that it only lasts about an hour, so if you're at all curious based on this description, I recommend giving it a shot. It's pay what you want, which means you can get it for free, though if you have the money to spare, I'd suggest giving a few dollars. I played A Bewitching Revolution for the first time on a live stream, knowing next to nothing about it. I could tell pretty quick that this was my kind of game when you're familiar, a black cat says, "If socialism does not stand unflinchingly for the exploited and oppressed masses of all lands, then it stands for none, and its claim is a false pretense." Fuck yeah, cat! Even though the description itself describes this as a communist game, I was still expecting some level of coded messaging, especially when it came to witchcraft. But nope. Your tarot readings are communist polemics, your potions are things like spray paint and Molotov cocktails. The only thing that is traditionally mystical is your ability to cast spells that turn pro-war billboards into solar panels or turn cops into pigs. Wait, hold on, what's the difference between those last two? I don't get it. But the moment I knew I wanted to talk about this game in a video came a little later when you come across this homeless person, and I think my reaction here says a lot. Please give what you can spare. Which of the city I remain homeless while houses stand empty? Can you help me find shelter? Oh God. Every once in a while, you'll see the statistic that there are more empty houses in America than there are homeless people, the implication being that we could end homelessness by just giving people shelter. But when you get into discussing this idea, you pretty immediately get bogged down in the questions of logistics, of property ownership, of funding, none of which even touches on the systemic issues which cause homelessness in the first place, and like so many conversations in leftist circles, you just wind up throwing your arms up and saying,
"The problem is capitalism. The problem is capitalism. The problem is capitalism. Capitalism. C-A-P-I-T-A-L-I-S-M. Capitalism. The problem is capitalism. The problem is capitalism. capitalism.
Over and over until everyone's just sighing about the magnitude of the task facing any revolutionary movement. Now you're too busy double-fisting wine coolers to even think about homelessness. In a bewitching revolution, you see a homeless person, you see an empty house, you break into the house, and you give it to the homeless person. However unrealistic this scenario may appear on the surface, simplifying it to the basest chain of events does something kinda special. When I first read this person's dialogue, I was sad. I can't really say why it hit me so hard. Maybe my HRT was screwing with my emotions. I'm gonna clean you up. You're gonna be fine. I'm just cleaning you up. She's so happy. Look at her. Regardless, I had to take a few seconds to collect myself because it almost brought me to tears. It had me feeling kinda hopeless as I walked away thinking, there's nothing I can do. But then I opened up this house, the homeless person came in, and I just gawked as the room transformed. Oh, I let this homeless person have this house. That is exceptional. Without any exaggeration at all, this was a revelatory moment for me. What you can hear in my voice as I'm reacting to this chain of events is the realization that it is possible. I spent so long feeling defeated by logistics that I'd never really thought about what it would look like, what it would feel like to reappropriate the homes largely owned by the wealthy and provide shelter to those who need it. And that's basically the loop that this game repeats from start to finish. Your various tarot-led polemics lay out in the most basic terms the necessity for things like labor exploitation, joblessness, and prisons under capitalism. These are precisely the topics that we leftists indignantly soapbox about all the time, which on their own are incredibly refreshing to see stated shamelessly in a video game. But in each of these cases, the game proceeds to show us what it would look like to act on those ideas. Train workers go on strike, fast food employees open a community kitchen, a job application center is turned into a public space for free lessons and live music, the prisoners themselves stage a protest that results in them being tear gassed, which further provokes a community riot that eventually leads to the police being exiled altogether. They can shoot us all to death, but they can't shoot us back to work. Whoa, that's a strong message. Yo. There are also lots of other touches. The spray paint you make is used to ruin security cameras, which is important because the surveillance state is pretty obviously antithetical to any revolutionary movement. But what really got me is that, okay, you plant these trees everywhere, right? And they grow this fruit that you can pick, which doesn't seem to do anything until you notice the many baskets all over the city that slowly start to fill up with fruit as you pick the trees. In any other game, these apples would be a collectible that you'd harvest to get that 100% achievement. But in this case, their utility is in how they benefit the community. You could hoard the apples for yourself, but why? To hoard in this way at all is itself a capitalist notion. The community kitchen introduces the idea of nutritional self-sufficiency, but this minor side detail also highlights the role that agriculture plays in a commune, and further underscores the ways that capitalism as an ideology has wormed its way into every facet of our daily lives, and how a revolution cannot leave any institution unexamined if it truly intends to be successful. And I pulled all of that from a mouse click. The Witch of the City character clearly draws from the tradition of labor agitators who go from place to place, essentially infiltrating worker communities to agitate for unionization and often Marxism generally. What's interesting about this choice, though, is that by putting you in the shoes of the agitator, this game kind of makes the assumption that you're already at least a little on board with communist theory. So then these polemics that are you presenting information to other people are also functionally aimed at you, the player, in an act of bizarre pseudo-dialectical interrogation. Like, here is a statement, here is the action it motivates. Now, do you disagree with the words, but seek the demonstrated outcome? Do you agree with the words, but feel their outcome is impossible? What this call and response setup did for me is highlight where my goals and my rhetoric were misaligned, which ideas I championed earnestly versus the ideas I generally assumed were a pipe dream. By acting out this revolution in microcosm, Bewitching Revolution is consistently insisting that yes, this strong rhetoric can be effective, and yes, the desired outcome is possible. Which, in a media landscape dominated by neoliberal vagaries and subtextual at best progressivism, is really refreshing. Now, I've so far avoided talking about the witch aspect of a Bewitching Revolution. This is partially because it's just not something I know a lot about. The game's description lists Silvia Federici as a major influence, and I'm not familiar enough with her writings to really make any comparisons. In a happy coincidence, however, Oliver Thorne over at PhilosophyTube did a video about witchcraft which draws largely from Federici's work.
Back when a lot of people believed in magic, establishing capitalism, Federici says, was difficult. Because what is magic at the end of the day? It's the promise of getting something for nothing, of a world without work, and without strict rules or boundaries in the way that science strives for or capitalism requires to organize labor.
Obviously, we should be skeptical of mysticism when it appears, as it's just as often the providence of cynical capitalists as it is of earnest and well-meaning comrades. What I will say is that witchcraft is not presented as a solution in itself here, but rather as a vehicle for ideas that can lead to a solution. You find a people who are desperate for answers, but instead of telling the future, you tell them the truth. Whether they act on that truth is their business, and I think that's an important distinction to make. As the Witch of the City, you're not a protagonist coming in and fixing everything for others. You are, again, an agitator attempting to raise class consciousness and help people become aware of the power they already have. The result is a game that emphasizes the fact that, yes, communism is in fact a community effort. You as one person are not going to change the world, but all of us together? That could be another story. And you know what? There's something to be said for the fact that in a world where logic and objectivity are enshrined as unimpeachable pole stars of truth, it kind of makes sense that communism would find an expedient vehicle in witchcraft. Witches themselves are historically framed as predators of the heart who exploit the emotions of those caught in the throes of passion. But I don't know, maybe a dominant narrative that frames a typically feminine practice as wholly inferior to a more controlling, authoritarian, and mostly male-dominated alternative is something we should interrogate.
I care the least, so I'm more rational. I win!
Communism is fundamentally an emotional ideology. It's outrage at a status quo that doesn't serve the masses. It's sadness for the exploitation of your fellow comrades. It's hope and determination that a better future is possible. This is not to say that communism is illogical, but that communist action often reads as illogical because we live in a world that teaches us to see any display of emotional investment as childish, cringeworthy, and ultimately self-incriminating. So it's not hard to see how witchcraft could function as a way to bypass that knee-jerk judgment, since the people in this case are already turning towards the seemingly illogical for answers. Capitalism was built through the violence of slavery, colonialism, witch hunts, and enclosures. Capitalism is maintained through the violence of armies, police, borders, and prisons. Capitalism will sooner lead us to annihilation than allow a more just society to emerge. We are left with only two possible futures: socialism or barbarism. I've been thinking lately about the utility of utopian storytelling. Like a lot of people who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, the predominant attitude of the media around me was that iconic postmodern cynicism that seemed at every turn to suggest that everyone is a grifter, sincerity is a lie, and nothing matters, and you can never change anything. Post-apocalyptic storytelling in particular had a huge boom in the 2010s, and nothing exemplifies this more than The Walking Dead. What we see in this story is a worst-case scenario, a world of constant threat and no infrastructure, where people have to band together to survive. Except The Walking Dead approaches its world from a deeply cynical place that insists that human beings are violent and self-destructive creatures who will find any excuse they can to shed blood. The soft and the meek die, the gullible are manipulated, and any gesture towards recreating the old world is shown to be deluded and pointless. This is a lawless land where might makes right, and the only way to survive is to be the last one standing. I mean, it's no coincidence that protagonist Rick Grimes is a cop who becomes a violent authoritarian leader that we are meant to think is always justified in his actions. Hashtag yes all cops. Grimdark narratives like this are often described as realistic, I guess because bad things happen in ways that don't feel good. But it doesn't feel realistic to me. It feels like a libertarian power fantasy where their dogshit ideology is never wrong. Every time my dark passenger punishes me for my hubris and forces me to watch The Walking Dead, I find myself asking questions like, where are the musicians? Where are the poets? Where are the comedians? Where are the painters? And maybe that sounds like a joke to you, but like, at no point in human history have we been without art, even in the most dire and apocalyptic of circumstances. Like, yeah, okay, you got zombies around, constant peril, I get it. But if you want to talk about realism, in World War I, soldiers in the trenches would carve flowers in abandoned shell casings. Are you really gonna tell me that there's no time for self-expression in this zombie apocalypse? Art is not frivolity. It is an intrinsic part of how we process the world around us. And not for nothing, but sometimes human beings, like girls, just want to have fun. Like, we can't be in survival mode all the time. You gotta rest, you gotta relax, you gotta have fun. It's just really frustrating to me that we continue to enshrine this social Darwinist attitude about storytelling where men taking authoritarian power and being right to do so are true to some nebulous concept of human nature. It just feels hollow and bitter and dystopian in the truest sense of the word. Like, it insists from top to bottom that there's just no hope for us without law and order. Ugh. Mainstream media and prestige golden age TV is basically just a cynical bukkake of fetishistic power fantasies and, oh hey, funny coincidence, finding excuses to kill queer people and people of color. Wow, what's the deal with that? That's weird. Huh. In this environment, is it really any wonder that we feel so goddamn hopeless all the time? Even as I have argued that we could end homelessness by reappropriating empty houses, on some level I didn't really believe it was possible. But the utility of Utopia is to set aside our cynicism and just imagine, for a moment, that the barriers aren't there. What would that world look like? What would it feel like? We have to be able to imagine a better future if we ever expect to have something to fight for. Those soldiers in the trenches carved flowers in cold metal to remember what organic life looked like, to remember that there was a natural world to return to. Who cares about what's realistic or what's reasonable? I'm not a machine that functions on logic. I'm an animal with a brain too big for my own good. And for better or worse, emotions are the vehicle for my subjective experience of reality. And right now, I'm terrified that the future is out of our hands. Communists have to be dreamers, and ours is a world that teaches us to kill our dreams. I do have some issues with the Bewitching Revolution. In particular, it seems to advocate for parallel power by virtue of being set in a small community within a larger city, and I don't think you have to dig very far in America's historical record to understand why this probably wouldn't work out in the long term. But again, this is a revolution in microcosm, for the purposes of opening our eyes to a possibility, and as such, we are meant to take its constituent elements as simplified versions of something that would be a lot more complicated in real life. And yeah, generally the game is simple. It's only an hour long, of course it is. But I think this kind of simplified communist agitprop has tremendous power in that it gives you the catharsis of living a revolution, and thus makes at least temporarily real what for most of us has only ever been theoretical. And I think the ability to imagine the best possible outcome, even as we're mired in the day-to-day struggles of laying the groundwork for it, is of paramount importance at a moment in time where the future of our world is very much uncertain. In the past, I've advocated for a sort of euphemistic leftism, like using the term socialism instead of communism because the latter seems permanently tainted by Cold War propaganda in the States. I felt for a while that you have to be subtle and strategic with how you deploy your rhetoric, as if you're sneaking into the back door of the establishment to hijack it from within. And I don't know, maybe there's still some merit to that, but this strategy kind of misses the fact that the establishment is already opposed to every kind of leftism, euphemistic or otherwise. You can't beat the liars at their own game because they aren't trying to tell the truth. So to hell with it. Why even bother pretending? Why hide it? Why be ashamed of what we believe?
I would actually encourage you to maybe check out some of the other work that I've done where I've been intensely...
Tell you what I do, Ash, I go and check out some basic facts about your hero, Obama.
He's not my hero. I'm a communist, you idiot. I'm not pro-Obama. I've been a critic of Obama. I'm a critic of the Democratic Party because I'm literally a communist.
After the revolution is complete, you do a sort of victory lap of this little community. And as you walk around, it might be easy to think that nothing really has changed. And largely, you're not wrong. People's daily lives probably won't be affected that much once it's all over. There's still work that needs to be done for the community. We still get bored and find ways to distract ourselves. We still have to raise our community and our families and have fun with our friends. But there's one specific thing that really stands out to me. Throughout the game, tarot has been your providence, a tool deployed on desperate people to help radicalize them. But now you see someone doing tarot for themselves. See, it's not enough to have the knowledge. You have to know how to spread it to other people so that they can use it for the same purpose. Because again, you aren't a savior. You are at best a guide. The question I ask myself when I see this is, would they really understand these tools and deploy them on their own if we had used coded language? If we had been euphemistic about what we meant? We live in desperate times. Ours is a world that is slowly coming unraveled. It's time for us to recognize that the game is rigged, that the system is unjust, and that those in power will do nothing to change that, unless we are bold, brazen, and unsubtle in what we mean to accomplish. And look, I don't know if we can do it. I don't know if it's possible. I want to believe that it is. But regardless, we have to try. And to try is to be bewitched by the dream of a revolution. Hello and thank you for watching this video about a communist video game. I would like to thank a handful of very important, special, beautiful human beings. Read the Patreon names here. Avery J, Nick Hansen, Violet Vizcara, Catherine Krall, Zofia Martel, Anne-Marie Bernier, Cam Chacon, Rachel Ann, Cocernell, Logan McQuiston, Austin McCauley, Get Dunked On, Alex Laporte, Going Public, L Something Something, Faye, Mila Kwan, Agent JR, J MacD, hello bub, hello you stinky bub, go eat a seed ugly. Quirk, Stephanie Johnston, Justin Kruk, Kill All Landlords, Amy Mims, Kristen Hartley, Not Sam, Bianca Gonzalez, Z, Robert Cutts, Gary Marshall, Scott Olson, Set, Cayenne Shepherd, Marcus Kittinger Switchcube, and Archer Duck, Jennifer Palmer, and Richard Daly. Those folks are my $10 a month patrons. Yes, that's right. At patreon.com/LTAS, that's patreon.com/LTAS, you too can have your name read aloud in the credits of my videos for just $10 whole a month. $5 patrons get access to my notes, scripts, and various other unused materials, while $1 patrons get access to a bunch of other exclusive content, including a 30-minute exclusive video essay. Also, there's a $25 tier where I write you a letter. I don't know why I'm not more hyped about that. Why did I read it like that? Wow, that's so many money options. If you like my voice, I also have a podcast, the Trans Questioning Podcast, where I talk about what it's like to be transgender. I'm also co-hosting a podcast called Fish in the Percolator, which is a Twin Peaks rewatch podcast. And yes, I promise Twin Peaks Part 2 is coming. I swear it's happening. I promise it's gonna happen. It's happening. I also do live streams over at twitch.tv/Sarah Zedig. Also be sure to subscribe to this particular YouTube channel because a few days after this video goes up, I'm going to do a live stream where I talk about your comments and questions and criticisms. So drop those in the place where those go. Maybe I'll read them live on the internet, where the internet lives. Lastly, you can find me on Twitter at HMSNoFun. But don't go to Twitter. Twitter is bad, unless you like it. In which case, don't go to Twitter. Twitter is bad. Okay, that's it. That's the video. Thanks. Thank you. All right, good. We're done. Hooray. Goodbye. Yay.